the main thing that I did is I went at it with the same amount of effort and energy that it takes to go at taking an audition. And I totally switched gears, but I did not lose that energy and that excitement that I had for preparing those auditions.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I appreciate so much you tuning in to this episode. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what we're doing here. And I would love it if you reach out, let me know your story. I love hearing people's stories. And you can do that by emailing me feedback@contrabassconversations.com. And this whole week, we're sharing stories about young entrepreneurs, 5 young musical entrepreneurs who didn't wait for opportunities to be offered to them. They went out, they hustled, they found opportunities, they've created exciting careers that are off the beaten path of what you might expect musicians to be doing. And I know you're going to love today's story about Peter Seymour. And Peter was on the podcast back in what I call the dark ages, almost 10 years ago, back in episode 53. And it's great to have him back on for a round 2. I love doing round 2s with people. Now, Peter is the basis for an extremely cool group called Project Trio, which includes Greg Patello on flute and Eric Stevenson on cello. And Peter, he plays bass, but he's also the business manager for this group. And they've really carved out their own space in the music world, Project Trio has. And I know you'll enjoy hearing about how Peter, Greg, and Eric made what is really a unique career happen. I mean, the world wasn't exactly crying out for a trio of flute, cello, and bass when they started out, but they had hustle, they had drive, they were creative, they were dedicated, and these guys made it happen. And in a major way, this is what they do. And we dig into all those details, including their teacher training program, which covers the group's extremely cool approach to teaching improvisation and many other topics. Great conversation. And you'll also hear some excerpts from Project Trio, including an excerpt from Adam Schoenberg's piece for flute, cello, bass, and orchestra called Scatter. And I'm putting this excerpt on. First of all, it's a cool piece, but also it's an excerpt with a group that I've played with for many years, the Iris Chamber Orchestra in Memphis, Tennessee. And cellist Eric Stevenson actually also plays in this orchestra. I know you'll love this conversation with Peter. You're going to get a lot of tips, advice, very inspiring. Here we go. Well, it's great to have Peter Seymour back on the podcast. It's been almost 10 years, and it's great to connect with you again. How are things, Peter?
Absolutely. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Things are going great. I'm here in New York City, where I live. I live in beautiful Brooklyn. And in the last 10 years, a lot of great musical things have happened, but more life things have happened as well. I've gotten married. I have an 18-month-old daughter, and I have a second daughter on the way here in a couple of months. So family is moving just as fast as music, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Wow. Yeah. You're keeping busy. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if people haven't heard our previous episode, just give us a quick recap of your background and
Sure.
the group and that kind of thing.
Sure. Just a little about me. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas, and I went from Dallas to study at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I studied with Scott Haig and Max Demoff while I was there. After Cleveland, I actually spent about 3 or 4 months playing in the Chicago Civic Orchestra before getting the call from the New World Symphony to join them. So I got to experience both of those ensembles. I spent time 3 years at New World. While I was at New World, I met the incredible Mr. Paul Ellison, and I went and did my master's at Rice and studied with Paul and met some of the most fantastic bass players I ever could have met and heard while I was down there. And then after my time at Rice, I spent some time as a full-time sub with the Cleveland Orchestra. I played a season there. I believe it was 05, 06, playing pretty much as a regular sub. And then for a few years after that, I continued on as a sub with the orchestra. But around 06, 07, I moved to New York City and I started up the Project Trio. The Project Trio is an ensemble, high energy chamber music ensemble, bass, cello, and flute, write all of our own music, arrange all of our music. And 10 years later, who would have thought? We're still doing it. We've been having a great run, traveling all over the world, playing a very, very unique brand of chamber music that's a true blend of classical music with jazz and hip hop and rock and salsa and everything in between. And it's been a really exciting ride doing that. I not only play the bass in the group, but I also run the ensemble. I do still, to this day, I do all the booking, all the tour management, and all that type of thing. So all the business sides of the ensemble as well.
And one thing I love, and I think we talked about this a little bit way back, but I definitely remember on Andrew Hitz's podcast, The Entrepreneurial Musician, you were talking with him about the work you put in at the beginning. Obviously, you're still working a ton booking the group, but how many people you called, that kind of thing. It was just amazing how many people you got in touch with. Like what? Because I think people think, oh, I'll just start my own thing. That's great. And here goes. But just the hustle and the dedication of getting a group going like that, it's just amazing. Maybe just talk people through what that experience was like.
Sure. The main thing that I did is I went at it with the same amount of effort and energy that it takes to go at taking an audition. For the first part of my life, I was doing the track of taking, orchestral auditions, and all the bass players who are listening know how much it takes. It takes hours and hours of daily dedication, and then not only the practicing dedication, but dedicating your mind to thinking about these things. And I totally switched gears, but I did not lose that energy and that excitement that I had for preparing those auditions. And I kind of threw myself into making that happen. And so I'll say there's many steps, and we can absolutely get into the actual steps. But when it comes down to it, I still tackle running the business the same way that I was tackling preparing for auditions, which was, having short-term goals, long-term goals, and tackling problems and daily issues. And I would keep, just like I used to keep practice logs, I still to this day keep full-on business logs of things that I need to do today, things that need to get done this month, things that need to get done this year, and so on. And so it's really just, kind of the same effort that it takes. But yeah, it's everything. There is so much to do. And there's so much creativity that goes into it. And it's one thing I love about running an ensemble is I always thought, if I did all the business, then I would miss out on all of the amazing, musical part of this thing. But when it comes down to it, the business is at least 50% of the creativity in it. How you run your business, how you build your business is going to define where you're able to go with the music. And I'm able to work with such incredible musicians in my ensemble, Greg Patillo and Eric Stevenson, who, are highly creative. They're able to do so many different styles of music, so many things with the music, that I've always felt confident that I could go out there and get us any type of gig, and that we would be able to show up and, execute and play at a high level.
Well, that's something I was talking with a guest a couple months ago about. Jerry Fuller. He played in the lyric opera and then moved into the business world. And we were talking about creativity in business and creativity in music. And what I think is interesting is you think of music as a creative profession, but if you actually really think about the life of like an orchestral bass player, for example, if you're being overly creative in this role, you're probably doing a bad thing. Right? And so it's an interesting, I think a lot of people might not even think about how creative it really can be to run a business, and especially something that's involving your own art, like the business itself is creative, and then what you've created is creative. And it's so interesting, this ensemble, bass, cello, flute. There is not a lot of previously existing repertoire, right?
Absolutely.
So you're starting this group. How did you go about finding music?
We started out, we went and looked for music. We've known each other since our time at the Cleveland Institute of Music. So there's no question that while all three of us were on the kind of classical path, the orchestral path, all three of us have always had a great passion for other styles. And so while we were in school, back in the late 90s, we were getting together after hours and we were playing music, and we were playing music that we like. I grew up loving hip hop music. I grew up loving jazz music and, of course, classical music. And so we were always getting together. Now, when it came time to form the ensemble, we looked for repertoire, and the blessing in disguise with it was that there was not really any repertoire. And we knew that if we wanted to have an ensemble, that we would have to write and we would have to arrange. And, I booked us some of our first shows, and we went into the woodshed and we just started writing music. And I think it's actually a unique thing. No one ever told us throughout my entire training, going to CIM and going to Rice and even New World, that we could compose music. And I think that's actually something that needs to change in there. Now, we're not writing Beethoven symphonies, of course, but we are writing really great music that is resonating with people of today. And I think it's because we use our classical training and our classical sensibility and then we kind of take sounds of today. We have elements of beatbox, elements of improvisation, and we add these into our pieces. And I think it's one of the reasons we do resonate. And you know what? In the last 10 years, we've written 5 full-length albums. We've produced 2 different EPs. We've produced a live full-length DVD. And now we have a full orchestral repertoire as well. We have 11 pieces for trio and orchestra that are compositions and arrangements, and we're playing those with professional orchestras all over the country. So I would just say to even anyone out there who has ever had an inkling to compose is go out there and do it. Write your first piece and see how it goes. And then write more. And program this stuff. If you're putting on a recital and you're a college student, or if you're a professional and you're putting on a recital, put one thing on the program that is your own, an arrangement of something you love, a composition that you've come up with. And I actually think that you'll even feel it from the audience, how much people love that music. And I think after our first shows, when we had written kind of all these more music that was sounding like jams, we realized how much it was speaking. And I think then we were like, man, we need to develop these jams. We need to make these jams even more, So that was kind of the beginning of writing the pieces.
Well, it's like that's the way that musicians throughout time have been. They've been performers,
Absolutely.
They've been composers, they've been, and it's like that's gotten lost among classical musicians, especially these days.
I think so. And I think it has a little to do with that. It is highly competitive to win these jobs. Yeah. And I think the best people in the field over the last however many years have really dedicated themselves to winning those jobs. And I think that's great. And because it has pushed the instruments, all of the instruments, and probably the bass the furthest. I mean, to think about what the bass sounded like however many years ago, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. So it's, so a lot of the leaders of the field have kind of done this. And so I think the improvisation and the composition has just kind of gotten pushed aside because of how competitive the winning the job part of it is. But I think now that there's kind of a new generation of musicians coming around, I think there's a lot of leaders of the field that are starting to do this other type of music making. Now, I'll also say a lot of times when entrepreneurship in general is being talked about, a lot of times it's being talked about in the way that it's, if you don't win a job, then you need to be entrepreneurial. And actually, I think that is way off. I think that people who win jobs actually have more opportunity to be entrepreneurial if they want to be, because they're infused into their communities. And actually, we're seeing a lot of people now doing this. And actually, I listened to your podcast with Joe Conyard, and he's a great example of someone. He's infused in the Philadelphia community. He's doing amazing things. He's building something. And I think more musicians who are playing in symphony orchestras who do these types of things, who kind of create their own entities, that's going to be the way that music really continues to be important in the communities, because you can really touch your community as a member of a symphony orchestra. And that said, people who don't win jobs, I think there's also lots of opportunity out there, huge amounts. And I'm so happy that I got on the track I'm on now.
Well, there's nothing as quite as uniquely satisfying as starting your own thing and creating your own thing. And yeah, like what Joe's done with it, with all his work in Philadelphia, or what other people in major orchestras have done, or ensembles or university jobs. Yeah, that's just bringing something new into the world, and something artistic. It's a beautiful thing. It's such a satisfying thing.
A lot of times I've actually felt that when you're just doing the performance, like putting together a recital, so much of the energy goes on just the performance. And I think sometimes people get kind of nervous for that performance because you've kind of put all this into, but when you do all the creative work on the business side of it, and like you're saying, you kind of create your own thing, it starts to become that the performance part of it, the actual playing the bass musically, becomes all fun and joy, because you have kind of put all the blood, sweat, and tears into creating the opportunity to then be standing on stage. And I think it almost takes away some of that pressure, because you've done more than just prepared the bass part for that show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, you guys, at least based on some of the stuff I was listening, you sometimes arrange as a trio.
Yes.
And can you talk through that process? What's that look like?
Yeah. All of our composing and arranging happens more like a rock band, where we get together, we sit around, everyone brings ideas to the table. You bring, and it happens in every way. Some of it happens where someone will bring an entirely thought out idea, like where I'll bring an entire bass line that has several sections, and we sit around and I present them and we improvise over them. Or someone else brings in, here's a melody and a groove and a concept for a middle section, and here are some transitions. So we sit around just like a band and we improvise over these ideas. And a lot of times we record some of these improvisations, and as we go, they start to develop. And then what we do is, say we start out with 50 of these ideas, or 30 or 40, we start to whittle it down and we say, okay, these 10 ideas, these are strong. Let's now focus on these 10 ideas. And then a lot of time, as the manager or the booking agent, what I'll do is I'll schedule a concert like 2 months away from when we're doing this. And here in New York, in a low pressure situation, a small venue where we can be inviting friends and colleagues and things. And I say, listen, in 2 months, we're going to play this show, and we're going to put all new music on the show. And it really gives us kind of like a deadline, just like if you were preparing for an audition again. And then we kind of throw ourselves into figuring out these pieces. And then the only thing you can do when you're doing this is you go out and you perform. And you play it, and you see how it feels, and you see how it is in front of an audience. And we do actually a lot of new music on our education stuff. We play for hundreds of thousands of students, and definitely tens of thousands of students every year. And so we use a lot of our new material in these concerts. So again, we're kind of playing it and performing it. And slowly but surely, these pieces start to become something. And then, after we've played them a bunch, we go into the recording studio, and we book the studio, and we go in there, and we go in and we play them and we work on them again. So that way, in the end, we come out with a CD of all new music and new material ready to be performed. But it happens very organically. Some pieces happen very fast, and we have a couple of pieces that we started 10 years ago when the group started, and they still haven't made it to the stage. And we have a couple pieces that we wrote in 5 minutes 10 years ago that are still on the stage, but we're trying to always keep it fresh for ourselves. And so we like to push ourselves, to compose new and arrange new.
What are some of the different kinds of programs that you guys do in schools? It looks like education's really become a big part of what you do.
Yeah, and I'll talk about the actual education initiative that we have, but it's absolutely a huge part of what we do. We do everything from performing for the whole school, large style school assemblies, and then smaller things that are workshops and master classes and seminar things but our performances are pretty much, we're just trying to promote creativity, the love of music, introducing instruments, introducing ways to think outside of the box with these instruments, and trying to show young people how much is possible with these instruments. And our big thing is we like to play in every style. So I think it's one of the most unique things about even a symphony orchestra is actually how many styles of music get presented. And sometimes I think people look at orchestra and they say, oh, it's just going to be classical music. But classical music is such a large genre and there's so many styles. It's a shame to just call it classical music because that's not necessarily what it is. The instruments are capable of so much. And I think that's what we're trying to present. And so we go in there and we play a little classical, a little jazz, a little hip hop, a little, like I was saying, all this stuff. And hopefully it starts to connect the dots to the students, what happens when instruments and like-minded people get together to play. So just trying to promote, excitement for music.
Now, if we go back to those early years of project, and I love you're describing how you took all that energy that you used on the audition trail and you moved it over to the group, and you had these long-term goals and short-term goals. Can you remember back to what some of those goals were for like that first year, and maybe how they're different like now?
Yeah. The first year, our biggest goals were that we wanted to produce our first album, which meant writing music to be able to then produce our first album. We wanted to book several tours that took us to several different parts of the country to perform. We wanted to develop an education initiative that would entail performing for students and doing workshops with students. And those were some of our first goals. So really just kind of creating music and performing. And made that happen. That took quite a bit of the energy of just like the whole group, everyone doing stuff. Because one thing I will say, everyone in our ensemble takes on the role that is best suited to them or the role that like needs to be done. Eric does so much of our technical stuff, recording our albums, mixing and mastering our albums. Greg has played a huge role in our entire kind of online catalog of videos, which has been a huge part of what we do. He's got tens of millions of views on his own videos, and we've also developed, hundreds of videos on YouTube. So we were always trying to build that as well. And so once we had gotten that step, which was let's write music, let's record music, let's perform music, that started rolling. And then that became a cycle of that we need to be writing, producing albums, producing video, and performing. So then that cycle got rolling. And then the next thing was, now let's think bigger. What else do we want to do? And the next big goal was that we came from the orchestra and we wanted to perform with orchestra. How are we going to make that happen? And now we have played with 40, 50 orchestras all over the country and great orchestras, St. Louis Symphony, Dallas Symphony, Detroit Symphony, Toronto Symphony, San Diego Symphony, and the list does go on. And now, actually, this last season, we did one of my longest term goals that was back then, is that I wanted to have collaborate with a composer. And I wanted to collaborate with a great composer so that we could really get our music onto the main stage with symphony orchestra. And this last season, actually, it's been a 3-year project, but we collaborated with Adam Schoenberg. For those of you who don't know Adam Schoenberg, go check him out. He's one of the absolute rising stars of the new American music community. He's an amazing young composer. And we got 4 orchestras to commission a work from Adam for Project Trio and Orchestra, and we've been performing that for the last year. And we have another show with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra in November. And so, and then more goals. I always wanted. I gained so much by going to music festival. We all did. Whoever's ever been to a music festival or a music camp or all the great bass camps that are happening now. We wanted a Project Trio music camp. We've done it for the last 4 years. This year we launched a teachers training workshop where we had teachers coming in from all over the country, and we're starting to teach them the way that we teach. We've actually developed an entire kind of, well, it's a method at this point, a true method of teaching young people to compose and perform in the style of what we're doing. And so there were the short-term goals that I talked about at the beginning, and then these kind of bigger goals, which were, of course, orchestras, education initiative, camps, things like this. And now we have some bigger things on the horizon. More collaborations and honestly, now one of the biggest things we're trying to do is book ourselves on larger and larger stages with bigger presenter organizations, bigger orchestras, and trying to collaborate with larger, some really, really great artists, which we actually have in the works right now.
That's exciting. And it's amazing to see. So you have this extensive network now, all these different ensembles you're playing with, your commissioning works. And I love, that's such a great way to commission, to getting multiple groups.
Yeah.
So because it spreads the financial burden out, and it ensures that piece is going to be played at least 4 times, like for Adam's piece. What were some of the steps that you took to build that network? I mean, you're 3 musicians, you've decided to start this group. How did you get from that point to this network that you have in 2016 now?
Yeah. Well, this was an exceptionally long process, of course, and it just is part of the dedication. First thing was first, I used my existing network. The music world's small, and we know everybody knows everybody knows everybody. So first step was, figuring out, who do I already know? And then starting to put some connections together. One of the first things that I did, and I talked about it on Andrew Hitz's podcast, and I talk about it often, is that I sat for weeks and even months, and every day I would think about, where do we want to be performing? Where could I see the Project Trio performing? And I started to, on an Excel sheet, I started to put down everything from the smallest venue in New York City to Carnegie Hall to and everything in between across the country and even across the world. And I started to look into ensembles that I looked up to see where they were performing and different presenter organizations. And so I started making this database of just venues, and I would go to their website and I would try to find who's their executive director, or who is their booking, agent, or who is their artistic administrator. And then I just started firing off email after email after email, making phone calls, direct phone calls, and started trying to put things together where I would say, okay, I'm looking at this presenter organization in Chicago. So I know this person in Chicago. Is there any connection there? And so I think for people who are wanting to do this type of thing, I think it's really important to research and be so well versed in what it is you do, to understand who has come before you, who is out there now, and what is everyone doing. And I think if you can really understand the industry just from a research background, then you can start to see, okay, my group fits in here. We want to be here. And then that's where it's, what are the steps that are going to take us to be here to here? But if you don't know where the venue is for you right now, and where the venue you want to go is, or, how, or the people you want to work with, then it's very difficult to get there. And so, and that was the beginning of building a really large network, because as you get one gig begets 2 and begets 4 and begets more and more. And so just going to that, again, going back to the research and knowing what opportunities are out there.
It's got to be kind of like a muscle. You're developing the
Sure.
you try and you get rejection, but you start to get success, and that begets more success. And yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's there's no exact way to do the business side of things. I think that actually it's one of the greatest things about kind of running a business is, everyone does it a little bit different. But, and that's even going back to, again, using your network, and just being ready to kind of, talk to anyone and, be ready to take in knowledge from anyone as well. And so.
Man, something you mentioned earlier, teaching the way that you guys teach improvisation, like in a school setting. And that's just one of the hardest things I found to teach, or it's one of the scariest things for teachers to introduce. Could you maybe just briefly, what do you guys do to introduce young people to improv or your style of improv?
Okay. How to say it? Well, I'll start by saying this. If there is anyone out there that really does want to be learning about this, feel free to reach out to me. And also, we are doing teacher trainings, workshops next summer as well. So I can start by saying that because it is involved. But the first thing that we do is we start with a drone. And so there's a drone note going on. And basically, we go around the room and have people just play a very simple solo. And basically, it could be one note or it can be several notes, but we tell people to keep it unbelievably simple. And what that does is it just because what you find is that when you ask how many people in here have improvised, there's not that many. And then how many people are scared of improvising? There are many who raise their hand. And so really how I think is that with improvisation, there's only one way to really learn, and that is by doing. There's ways to practice and there are things to practice, but the only way to get better at it is to truly just do it. And so our whole entire class is all about doing. And we start at the simplest thing. And if people are even like with the younger kids who don't even, can't necessarily play a phrase, we start and we say, let's all play this drone. Let's play this drone together. Now, let's play this drone. And what we want to do is we'll take 5 people and let's build a 5-note drone chord. And so you start to hear how notes sound together and how they sound against each other. And then it is just, here, let's experience this, experience that. We then go from drones to playing vamps, teaching people how to improvise simple vamps, and then how you solo over a simple vamp and what that does to your solo. I don't know if any of this makes sense because it's not as easy to talk about because the class is actually all about doing. And one thing that we don't do especially the first few classes that we would be teaching this is we try not to ever talk about improvisation. It's just like, here's a drone. Okay, everybody sing this pitch. Now find that pitch on your instrument. Now everyone play the pitch. Okay, everyone stop. Let's listen. And now we're going to go around the room and we want everyone to play something. And play something simple. Don't try to play something complex. And then you go around and you actually hear everyone play. And you know what? Usually, even if it's elementary kids or high schoolers, a lot of times you can really create something that's kind of magical. And at the end of it, one of the greatest things is just to stop and it's kind of quiet and say, man, that was cool. And we just created that. Now, let's do it again. What made one better than the other? Okay, and then it opens up kind of discussion. It's like, now let's go around the room. Let's do it again. And then we do it again. And then, like I said, the next thing, kind of introducing a vamp. So if we've got, but then we go to boom, 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 boom. all of a sudden your solo is then going to be influenced by that. And so what makes that influence? And then that's just step 1 and 2. And then you just keep it going. And we kind of teach them then. So if we're doing this in big groups, we then go to duets or trios. And we say, now here, you drone and you solo together. And what we'd like to say is that what we're trying to teach is ways for people to then go home and play music with your friends, because it's the coolest part about playing music. I love playing in orchestra and love playing in large group, but after you're done with your large group, you should be able to go and just kind of sit with someone else who has an instrument who you like and play music. And one of the coolest things, and the Project Trio still does this, is everyone just breathes and we come in together in timeless music. Because really, it doesn't matter what notes you play. They all fit in strange, beautiful, and unique ways. And the more experience you then have, the more, and especially playing with the same people, you really can start to develop your own language.
Sounds like a very non-intimidating way to introduce improv. You're not like, all right, here's what you do over the half diminished chord. All right, run this scale. Yeah.
I'll tell anybody out there who is listening, who does this kind of thing, the worst way to start improv is talking about scales and how they work, because that instantly is going to lose so many people. You know what I mean? And so I feel that like if you can kind of introduce a lot of these concepts without talking about scales or chords, wait for that. And all that is super important. Actually, what's really interesting is with this kind of whole drone type of exercise, you can actually start to discuss modes pretty quickly. I mean, it still takes a little while. And for that, you have to have people who can actually semi-play their instruments. But it's interesting that you can kind of introduce modes and have people understand it, because you're not talking about it as scale degrees. You're talking about it as sounds and how a scale sounds over this drone. I found it interesting, because I've tried to teach modes, by just talking about them as scales and things. It's very difficult. But, if you can do it with like just your ears, there's something that becomes, I think, more simple.
Oh yeah, well, and I love the idea of just that drone, and then you play that drone, and then you just play another note, and that's just like such a beautiful beginning to it sounds great.
It's a fun class.
Yeah, I was looking on your website. I see you guys are doing a composition competition.
Yep, 3rd year.
Yeah, cool. What are the details? I'll put a link to that, but maybe let folks know a little bit about the details of that.
Sure. This is our 3rd year. It's just yet again how we're always kind of trying. This is another one of the, these kind of quote unquote goals that we had back then is, just another way that we could collaborate with people. And this is the 3rd year. We have a prize. It's a small prize, but it's a good prize still. $500 plus a recording and a premiere of your work. And, if it becomes something that we really are liking too, it becomes part of the program. Basically, you'll see on the link, but over the last 3 years, this will be the 3rd one, we've gotten between 20 and 50 new compositions for bass, cello, and flute. We hear some really interesting stuff, some really great stuff, some not so good stuff. And each year we pick a new piece that we felt was the best of the group, and we learn it to the best of our abilities and go out and play it. And it's been a really interesting process. It's great to see what people think of for our ensemble. It's great to see people coming up with weird and interesting ways to use some of the new techniques that we do. And then it's also amazing for us to be able to kind of use our minds and stretch our minds in that way. Like doing this concerto with Adam Schoenberg has been so great because we do spend so much of the time playing our own music that it's so nice to kind of get new music that someone else creates for you and learning it. And it makes you think about your instrument different. It makes us think about our ensemble different. So it's a really fun thing, and we're trying to do it every year. And really, we're just trying to create some new repertoire for the bass, cello, and flute.
It's such a fascinating path you've led professionally. And I love that you've had orchestral success that people would love to have, playing for a year with Cleveland and going on the audition trail. And then you took this right turn, I guess we can call it, and you've created this new kind of group, and you've been running this. And I'd love to hear if you could go back in time to say 18-year-old Peter, or you could pick the age, but let's just say 18-year-old Peter, what advice would you have for him?
The main thing would be the same thing, that the best advice is, if you want to play music, is to practice unbelievably hard and just to be as great as the instrument as you can be. And that's why I wouldn't change too much, except I would have even worked harder, because I think no matter what path you take musically, you have to try to be, you have to aspire to be playing at the highest level. And also, as all of us know who are now older, as you get older, there is less and less time to practice. And so I think that when you're 18, just diving in and just playing as much as possible. Now, if I could have done anything different, I think that I would have done more performing and actual getting out there and playing. So many times as bass players, we do one or two recitals. We go out and play a handful of auditions, be it 5 or 20. And then we play a few chamber music recitals over the year. But really, when does anybody actually hear you play? Not that much, because when we sit in the section, I love sitting in a bass section, but no one hears you. And so I think so often, for your recital or for your audition, I was always so nervous. And I think it, didn't help, and it didn't have me playing great auditions or great recitals. It was because I didn't practice performing enough. And so I think that's the main thing I would have changed, is that get out there and play. And it doesn't matter. A performance is a performance is a performance. If you're playing for a group of first graders at the local elementary school, or you're playing at the veteran hospital or the community center, or you're playing a concert for your friends and peers, or you're playing an open recital or an open mic, it's the same experience. It's the same feeling that you get when I still go in and play in a really large concert hall now. And actually, over the last 10 years, I've become so much more confident. And it's because I play tons of concerts where basically I am the bass player. So if I am messing up, you're going to know it. You know what I mean? Whereas I spent a long time before, I felt, for me personally, I was doing a lot of hiding in the bass section. So I think just get out and perform. And what it will do is it'll make you feel confident in any performance situation. And the more confidence you have, the better you're going to do. Because once you've done all the work and you show up at these auditions or you show up in performance situations, a lot of times everybody's playing at a high level. And there's not that much a difference between the guy or girl who wins and the others who go home. And so a lot of times just feeling confident goes a long way, and going out there and feeling good. Because mistakes happen in every performance, and it's how you react to those mistakes. But there's a big difference between practice and performing. And so you must practice performing.
Good advice, man.
Hey. I hope everybody goes out there and is practicing that bass and playing as much as possible. It's one of the best instruments there is.
Hey, well, thanks for doing this. I can't believe it's been almost 10 years. This is great though. It's good to catch up, and I love what you guys are doing.
I want to say this. I thank you, sir, for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. I love listening to this podcast. I love that you are really starting to now, after doing this now for 10 plus years, such a catalog and library of what I would consider some of the greatest bass players on the planet. So I appreciate what you do. And so keep it up. and I'll keep listening. And for anyone out there who's interested, I'd love to see you at a live show. It's the main way to see music, projecttrio.com, and you can just check out. We got a lot of concerts. We're going to be all over the country. We're going to be in Europe 3 or 4 times next year too, so maybe we'll see you there. And and I will say this, young musicians, go out there and support live music. It's the most important thing. Actually, forget young musicians. All musicians should support live music as much as possible. It's one of the most important things that we can do as musicians is get out there and see live music, because that's the way that someone's going to come see us play live music, and that the art form will go on. Because what we do, I think, as classical musicians and jazz musicians it's the live experience, and it's so important, and it's one of the biggest difference between our style of music and kind of popular styles. Is popular is really about the recording, and you go to a concert and it's more about the show and the entertainment, whereas the art form of kind of more art music is a live performance. So get out there and see music.
Thanks again, Peter, for the great interview. And check the group out at projecttrio.com. And thank you again for listening to this episode. I appreciate it. I know Peter and the guys in Project Trio appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. And I know you could be doing many things with this hour. And it's an honor that you're spending time with me and with Peter and with Project Trio, just covering what's going on in the music world. It's very exciting right now, what's going on. There's so many interesting things, and that's part of why I wanted to do this week and feature these 5 people. And visit our website, contrabassconversations.com, to learn about everything that we've done in the past and moving forward, what's going on. Email me, feedback at contrabassconversations.com. I'd love to hear from you. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. Join the email list. Just stay in touch, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.